It was a cold evening, the kind that made people hurry home wrapping their coats tightly and avoiding eye contact. The streets were half empty, and the fading sunlight stretched long shadows across the pavement. He was walking home from work, his mind lost in thoughts of bills, deadlines, and the quiet emptiness that waited in his small apartment. It had been just another day, nothing special, nothing terrible, just the kind of day that blended into the next. As he walked past the old bus stop, he noticed someone sitting on the bench. At first, he didn't pay much attention. People waited there all the time. But as he drew closer, something caught his eye. A slight movement, a trembling of shoulders. The woman sitting there wasn't just waiting for a bus. She was crying, trying hard to hide it from the world. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped tightly together, and her whole body seemed to shrink into itself as if she was trying to disappear. He slowed down, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to keep walking. After all, it wasn't his business. Everyone had their own struggles. But something inside him wouldn't let him move on. Maybe it was the way she tried so hard not to be noticed, or the silent desperation that hung around her like a shadow. He hesitated, his heart caught between concern and fear of intruding. Finally, he took a quiet step toward her. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you all right?" The woman didn't look up right away. She wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, pretending nothing was wrong. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Just waiting for the bus." He nodded, though it was clear she wasn't fine. There was no bus schedule posted, and the buses on that route hadn't run this late in months. He could have pointed that out, but he didn't want to embarrass her. He just stood there for a moment, not sure what else to say. The silence between them stretched. Cars passed by now and then, their headlights flashing across her face. That's when he saw it, not just sadness but exhaustion. The kind of tiredness that comes from life itself weighing you down. "Do you need some help?" he asked carefully. "I can call someone for you if you'd like." She shook her head, still not meeting his eyes. "There's no one to call," she said. Her voice cracked a little on the last word, and that small sound felt heavier than anything else around them. He took a breath, trying to choose his words. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "it helps to just not be alone. I can wait here with you for a bit if that's okay." She didn't answer right away. For a few seconds, she just stared at the ground. Then she gave a small nod. He sat down on the edge of the bench, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel uncomfortable. The air was cold, but neither of them seemed to mind. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Sometimes silence was its own kind of comfort. After a while, she spoke so softly he almost didn't hear her. "I didn't think anyone would stop," she said. He turned his head slightly toward her. "Most people are just in a hurry," he replied. "But that doesn't mean they don't care, they just don't always know how to help." That made her let out a small, tired laugh. Not a happy one, but it was something. "I guess," she murmured. "It's been a rough few weeks." He didn't press her for details. He just listened. There was something healing in letting someone speak at their own pace. She talked a little more after that. Nothing too personal, just bits and pieces about how everything seemed to fall apart all at once. Her job had ended unexpectedly. Someone close to her had passed away. She'd moved to a new city, hoping for a fresh start, but instead, she'd found herself alone, drowning in loneliness. He listened without interrupting, nodding now and then, letting her know he heard her. It wasn't pity she needed. It was understanding. When she finally stopped talking, she sighed and said, "I'm sorry. You don't even know me, and here I am spilling everything." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's easier to talk to someone you don't know," he said. "There's no judgment, no expectations." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time he saw her eyes. They were red from crying, but there was something fragile and searching in them, as if she was trying to remember what kindness felt like. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged gently. "You don't need to thank me. You just looked like someone who could use a bit of company." They sat a while longer, and as the evening grew darker, the streetlights flickered on. The world around them seemed quieter now. The chaos of the city faded into the background, leaving only the sound of cars in the distance and the occasional rustle of wind. When it started to get late, he said, "Do you have a place to go? I can walk you there if you'd like." She hesitated before answering. "I'll be fine," she said, though her tone didn't sound convincing. He didn't want to push, but something told him she didn't have anywhere to go. Still, he respected her space. "All right," he said softly. "But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm usually around this area after work. Same time, most evenings." She gave a small nod, almost like she wanted to believe she might see him again. Before leaving, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was an old receipt, but he scribbled his phone number on the back of it. "Just in case," he said, handing it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. "Thank you," she said again, this time with a little more strength in her voice. He smiled and nodded, then started walking away. As he looked back once, he saw her still sitting there, holding the piece of paper, staring at it like it was something precious. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He didn't even know her name, but her sadness had settled in his heart. It reminded him of his own quiet battles, the ones he never talked about. The long nights when he wondered if anyone would notice if he disappeared. Maybe that was why he couldn't walk away earlier. He saw a reflection of his own pain in her eyes. The next few days, he kept expecting to see her again. Every evening he passed by the same bus stop, glancing around, but she wasn't there. A part of him worried. What if something had happened to her? What if she was still alone somewhere, trying to hold herself together? Then on the third evening he saw her again, not at the bus stop but across the street, sitting in a small cafe. She looked tired but calmer. He hesitated before walking in, not wanting to seem intrusive. But when she noticed him, her eyes widened slightly, then softened into a small, grateful smile. He walked over slowly, and she nodded toward the seat across from her. "I guess you were right," she said. "Talking to a stranger can help more than you think." He smiled and sat down. "I'm glad you think so." They didn't talk about sad things that day. Instead, they talked about simple things. How the coffee was too strong. How the weather couldn't make up its mind. How people in the city always looked like they were rushing somewhere but never really knew where. The conversation was easy, natural. For the first time in a long while, both of them felt a sense of peace. When they parted that evening, she looked lighter somehow, as if a small weight had been lifted, and he too felt different. The loneliness that had quietly followed him for months didn't feel as heavy anymore. That night, as he walked home, he thought about how strange life was. How two strangers could meet by accident, and something as small as a kind word could change everything. He didn't know what would come next, but deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. It had only just begun. The days that followed were calmer, yet he couldn't help but think about her. That meeting at the cafe had stayed in his mind. It wasn't just what she said or how she looked. It was the quiet strength beneath her sadness. Something told him she had been through more than she had shared. He often passed the same cafe after work now. Sometimes she was there, sometimes she wasn't. But whenever she was, she would lift her head from her cup of coffee and smile faintly when she saw him, as if they had some unspoken understanding. One Thursday evening, he saw her again, sitting by the window. The sunlight filtered through the glass and touched her face, making her look softer, almost peaceful. He hesitated before walking in, wondering if she wanted company or space. But before he could decide, she waved at him gently, a small smile playing on her lips. He walked over and she gestured to the chair across from her. "You're late today," she said lightly. He chuckled. "Long day at work. I wasn't sure if I'd see you here again." She shrugged, staring at the cup in her hands. "I come here because it's quiet. No one really looks at anyone else here. It feels safe somehow." He nodded. "I get that. Sometimes silence feels better than company." She looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, "Except sometimes company makes silence less heavy." That line stayed with him long after she said it. They talked for a while about ordinary things again. Music, places they had been, books she used to love reading but hadn't touched in months. He found himself laughing genuinely, something he hadn't done in a while. When she spoke, her tone shifted between sadness and strength. She talked about how the world kept moving even when she couldn't, about how people said time heals everything, but sometimes time just stretches the pain. He didn't interrupt. He listened. That was what she needed most. Someone who didn't rush her or try to fix her. As the evening grew darker, she glanced at the clock. I should get going, she said softly. He nodded. Do you live nearby? A few blocks from here, she replied. It's not far. Would you mind if I walked you there? He asked gently. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. I'd like that. They stepped outside into the cool night air. The streets were quiet except for the sound of passing cars and the distant hum of the city. She walked slowly, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. He didn't speak much. He just walked beside her, matching her pace. When they reached a small apartment building, she stopped. This is me, she said, turning to face him. He nodded. All right. I'm glad you got home safely. She gave a small nod and then looked at him, her expression thoughtful. You're kind, she said. But why? You don't even know me, he thought for a moment. Maybe because I know what it feels like to be invisible, he said quietly. And no one deserves to feel that way. Her eyes softened. You don't seem invisible. He gave a faint smile. Most people don't, but that doesn't mean they aren't. She didn't answer, but there was understanding in her gaze. Thank you, she said finally. For staying, he nodded. Anytime. She turned and went inside, leaving him standing there for a moment, staring at the old building. Then he turned and walked home, feeling something stir in his chest, a mix of sadness and peace. The next few weeks turned into a quiet rhythm. They began meeting often, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. The cafe became their place, simple, quiet, safe. They didn't talk about the deep things all the time. Some days they just sat together without saying much, and somehow that felt enough. Other days she opened up more piece by piece. She told him about how she had moved to the city to start over after losing someone she loved deeply. She didn't share all the details, but he didn't need them. The pain in her eyes spoke louder than words. She said she used to believe that people always showed up for you when you needed them most. But she had learned the hard way that sometimes no one does. That night at the bus stop, she hadn't planned to talk to anyone. She had wanted to disappear quietly. But then he showed up, a stranger with no expectations. No judgment, just quiet compassion. He listened, and in that listening, she found a kind of safety she hadn't felt in years. And while he helped her heal, he didn't realize that she was also helping him in ways she didn't know. He had his own emptiness. He had spent years keeping to himself, working, coming home, sleeping, and repeating the cycle. His life had become a straight line with no colors. But through her, he began to notice small things again. The smell of fresh coffee, the sound of laughter from a nearby table, the warmth of sunlight on cold mornings. One evening, as they were walking near the river, she stopped to watch the water. The city lights shimmered on its surface, and the sound of gentle waves filled the air. It's strange, she said softly. I used to love watching the water. It always made me feel calm. But then after everything happened, I stopped coming here. It hurt too much to remember. He looked at her and said quietly, Sometimes when something hurts too much, the only way to take it back is to face it again. She smiled faintly. You sound like someone who's learned that the hard way. He nodded. Maybe. For a while they just stood there watching the water flow under the bridge. It was one of those moments where nothing needed to be said. After that night, she started doing small things she hadn't done in a long time. Going for walks, cooking her favorite meals, writing in her journal again. It wasn't easy, but she was trying, one step at a time. He noticed the change in her, and it made him quietly proud. One afternoon, as they sat at their usual table, she said, You know, I used to think people were either good or bad, but now I think they're just people. Some are lost, some are hurting, some are just trying to be kind in a world that makes it hard. He nodded. That sounds about right. She smiled softly. You're one of the kind ones. He chuckled. I don't know about that. Well, she said, you stopped when no one else did. That makes you different. Her words touched something deep in him. He had never thought much about it. Stopping that night had felt natural, not heroic. But hearing it from her made him realize how small actions could mean everything to someone who had nothing left to hold on to. As days turned into weeks, they became part of each other's daily routine. There were no promises, no labels, just a quiet companionship that felt real. Sometimes they'd walk through the park and talk about their dreams. Hers of starting her own small art studio someday, his of leaving his dull office job to do something meaningful. She encouraged him, saying, You help people without even realizing it. Maybe that's what you're meant to do. He laughed softly. I'm not sure the world pays people for being kind. Maybe not, she said with a smile. But it changes the world anyway. Her optimism was slowly returning, and he could see it in the way she carried herself. Her laughter came easier, her eyes looked brighter, and though the pain hadn't vanished, it no longer controlled her. But he also started noticing something else. She often stared into the distance, lost in thought. There were moments when her expression darkened, like she was fighting memories she didn't want to remember. He didn't push her. He just stayed by her side. He had learned that healing didn't come from pressure. It came from patience. One night, as they were leaving the cafe, she said quietly, "Do you ever think some people are meant to meet? Like, it's not random?" He thought about it and then said, "Maybe. Or maybe it's just that sometimes the right people show up when you need them most." She smiled softly. "Maybe you're right." He walked her home again that night, and when they reached her building, she paused before going in. "You know," she said, "the night we met, I almost gave up. I thought no one would ever care enough to stop. But you did. And because of that, I'm still here." He felt his chest tighten. "You don't have to thank me," he said gently. "I just did what anyone should do." She shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "Not everyone would have. But you did. And that changed everything." She smiled one last time before going inside, leaving him standing there in the quiet night, feeling a strange warmth spread through his heart. As he walked home, he realized something. Sometimes, helping someone else find their light was the only way to rediscover your own. He didn't know where this path would lead or how long it would last, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that his life had meaning again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of his own healing. 2. The air was colder now and the days felt shorter. It had been a few months since that night when he first saw her crying by the road. What started as a small act of kindness had grown into something much deeper, something that neither of them had planned, but both had quietly needed. They still met often at the cafe, though lately, their talks had become more open. The walls she once had around her heart were starting to soften. Sometimes she spoke about her past, not all at once, but in little pieces, as if she was slowly putting together a puzzle she had once given up on. One afternoon, the rain poured heavily outside and the cafe was nearly empty. They sat by the window watching the drops race down the glass. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly, lost in thought. He noticed her silence and asked gently, "You're quiet today. Something on your mind?" She gave a small sigh. "Just memories. It's strange how they come back when you least want them to." He nodded. "Sometimes rain does that. It makes you remember things you thought you'd forgotten." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you've had your share of memories too." He chuckled softly. "Maybe we all do." She looked at him for a moment as if deciding whether to continue. Then she said, "I never told you everything about that night. The night you found me." He stayed silent, letting her take her time. "I wasn't just sad," she began. "I was completely lost. I had been trying to hold everything together for so long, my job, my family, my own sanity. And when everything started falling apart, I realized I didn't have anyone left who really saw me. I felt invisible." Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept speaking. "That night, I just wanted to walk. I didn't even know where I was going. But when I saw the lights and people around me laughing, it made me feel even more alone. Then you showed up," he swallowed quietly. "I'm glad I did," she smiled sadly. "You saved me without knowing it. You didn't ask what was wrong or why I was crying. You just stayed, and that made me feel human again." The simplicity of her words hit him deeply. Sometimes people didn't need grand gestures, they just needed someone to care enough to stay. The rain outside softened, and a quiet peace filled the space between them. After a while, she asked, "Do you ever wonder why people cross paths the way they do? Like maybe there's a reason for it?" He thought for a moment. "Maybe it's not always fate," he said. "Maybe sometimes it's just that one person's kindness arrives when the other person's hope runs out." She looked at him and whispered, "That sounds like fate to me." They both laughed softly, breaking the heaviness that had lingered in the air. In the following weeks, life began to shift for both of them. She started painting again, something she had given up long ago. He encouraged her, telling her that maybe her art could help her heal. So she brought her sketchbook to the cafe sometimes, drawing while he read or worked quietly beside her. It was peaceful, and their silence felt warm, not empty. One day she showed him one of her drawings. It was a simple picture of two figures sitting at a cafe table, one with a cup of coffee, the other with a book. The rain outside the window was softly sketched, almost like a memory caught on paper. He smiled. "That looks familiar," she laughed. "It's us. The first time we talked." He looked at the drawing closely. "You made the rain look softer than it was that night." She tilted her head. "Maybe because now when I think of that night it doesn't hurt as much." Her words made him realize something: she was healing. Slowly but truly, and somehow in helping her, he had begun to heal parts of himself that he hadn't even known were broken. One morning, he got a message from her. "Can you meet me by the park at sunset? I have something to tell you." He felt a small wave of curiosity mixed with worry. The tone of the message was gentle but carried a certain weight. When he arrived, the park was bathed in golden light. She was sitting on a bench near the lake, her hands folded in her lap. He walked over and sat beside her quietly. "You said you wanted to talk," he said softly. She nodded, looking down at the water. "I did. I've been thinking a lot lately. About moving back home." His chest tightened slightly. "Oh," she nodded again. "I've been away for too long, and I think I'm finally ready to face it. The memories, the people, everything I ran away from." He stayed quiet for a moment. "That's a brave thing to do." "It doesn't feel brave," she said with a faint smile. "It feels terrifying. But maybe that's what healing is, doing the things that scare you until they don't anymore." He nodded. "Maybe you're right." She turned to him then, her eyes soft but steady. "I don't know how to thank you for everything. You didn't just listen. You reminded me that I still mattered. You showed me that kindness still exists." He looked down, unsure what to say. "You don't need to thank me. You did the hard part yourself." She smiled gently. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have done it without you." The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. They sat there in silence for a long time, both knowing that their paths were about to change. The next few days passed quietly. She began preparing for her move, sorting through her things and saying goodbye to the few friends she had made in the city. He helped her pack some boxes and carry them down to the moving van. When everything was almost done, they stood together outside the apartment building where they had said goodbye so many times before. "So," he said softly, "this is it." She nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. "For now," he smiled faintly. "You'll be okay." "I know you will." She took a deep breath. "I think so too, but it's hard to leave something that made me believe again." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You don't lose people who leave good things behind. You carry them with you." She blinked back tears and smiled. "Then I guess I'll carry you with me." He tried to respond, but his voice caught in his throat. He just nodded. Before leaving, she reached into her bag and handed him a small folded paper. "Open it later," she said. He watched as she got into the car. She waved once, and then she was gone, the sound of the engine fading down the street. He stood there for a while, the city lights flickering around him, the wind cold against his face. Finally, he unfolded the paper in his hands. Inside was a small sketch, a drawing of two people standing at a bus stop in the rain. At the bottom, in small handwriting, were the words, "You stopped when no one else did. You changed my story." He felt his eyes sting as he folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Weeks went by. Life returned to its usual rhythm. The cafe felt a little emptier, the walks a little quieter. But there was also something else, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again, but somehow, that didn't feel sad. It felt right. She had found her way, and he had found a purpose he didn't know he needed. Sometimes he'd stop by the cafe, order his usual coffee, and sit by the window. The rain would fall, and he'd watch it in silence, remembering that night when he had seen a stranger in pain. Only now, she wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was a reminder that one small act of kindness could change two lives at once. And in that quiet thought, he realized something powerful. Sometimes, the miracle isn't about saving someone else. It's about finding the courage to care when the world tells you not to. He smiled softly to himself, took a sip of his coffee, and looked out at the rain. Somewhere out there, she was painting again, living again, smiling again, and that was enough. Weeks passed, and life seemed to settle into a new rhythm for both of them. She was getting used to her new job, and every time they met, she had something new to share. A funny coworker story, a project she was proud of, or just small things that made her smile again. It felt good to see her like that. He often found himself listening more than talking, simply enjoying her energy. But one evening, when he arrived at their usual cafe, he noticed she wasn't there. The waitress said she hadn't come in that day. He waited for a while, sipping his coffee slowly, thinking she might still show up. But as time went by, a quiet worry began to grow inside him. He tried calling her, but there was no answer. He sent a short message, nothing too heavy, just asking if she was okay. No reply came that night. The next morning, she finally texted back, "I'm sorry for not showing up. Just needed some time to think. I'm fine." He stared at the message for a long moment. Something about it didn't sound fine. When he met her a few days later, she looked tired again. Not broken like before, but different. There was a weight in her eyes that hadn't been there recently. He asked gently, "Everything all right?" She nodded quickly, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, just work stress. You know how it is," but he didn't believe her. Her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. They sat for a while in silence. He didn't push her to talk. He knew sometimes people needed to find their own words. Finally, she sighed and said softly, "I got a call from my mother. She's sick. I might have to go back home for a while." He frowned. "Is it serious?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it's serious. She's been hiding it from me for months. She didn't want to worry me." He reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "You should go to her. Family comes first." She looked down. "I know, I'm scared to leave everything here. My job, this life I just started building again. What if everything falls apart the moment I step away?" He squeezed her hand lightly. "Sometimes life gives us chances to do the right thing, even if it's scary. You're stronger now than you think." She nodded, but he could see tears forming in her eyes. "You always say the right thing." He smiled sadly. "Not always. But I try to say what I'd want to hear if I were in your place." The next week went by in a blur. She had to make quick arrangements, talking to her boss, sorting her apartment, packing her things. He helped her where he could, though she often insisted she could handle it alone. Still, he showed up to carry boxes, to fix a stubborn suitcase zipper, to make sure she had food while she packed late into the night. It wasn't about doing big things. It was about being there. The night before she was set to leave, they met one last time at the small park near her apartment. It was quiet, with the sound of wind moving through the trees. She sat on a bench, her bag beside her, while he stood nearby, not sure what to say. She broke the silence first. "You know, when I met you, I didn't even want to talk to anyone. I thought everyone would just walk past me like I didn't exist. But you didn't," he smiled faintly. "Maybe because I knew what that felt like." She turned to look at him, eyes soft. "I don't think you realize how much you've changed my life." He shook his head gently. "You give me too much credit." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You listened when no one else did. You saw me when I couldn't even see myself anymore. You were a miracle when I needed one." He felt something tighten in his chest, but he didn't say anything. She looked at him for a long time, then said quietly, "I don't know how long I'll be gone. But no matter what happens, I'll never forget what you did for me." He nodded slowly. "You don't owe me anything. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't disappear into pain again. Keep living. Keep drawing. Keep being you." Her eyes glistened. "I'll try." When she left the next morning, he walked her to the station. The train platform was busy, full of people rushing in every direction, but they stood still, facing each other in that small moment that felt frozen in time. She hugged him tightly, longer than she ever had before. When she pulled away, she smiled through her tears. "Take care of yourself, all right?" He nodded. "You too." As the train doors closed and she disappeared into the crowd, he felt something hollow open inside him. He told himself it wasn't goodbye forever, but deep down a part of him knew things would never quite be the same again. Days turned into weeks. He went about his usual routines, work, home, the cafe, but everything felt quieter without her around. He found himself looking at the empty seat across from him, half expecting her to walk in with that soft smile of hers. Sometimes she sent him short messages, updates about her mother, photos of sunsets from her hometown, a picture of an old sketch she had redrawn. He always replied warmly, though he kept his messages simple. But over time, the messages became less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. He tried not to overthink it. Life was busy, he told himself. She was probably focused on her family, her new life. Still, he missed her presence, the easy conversations, the quiet comfort. One evening, he was walking home when he passed the bus stop where they had first met. It was raining again, just like that night. He stood there for a moment, remembering how small and broken she had looked and how far she had come. A faint smile touched his lips. Maybe that's how life worked. You meet people when they need you, and when they're strong enough, they move on. That thought comforted him somehow. Months later, a letter arrived in his mailbox. It wasn't something he expected. Hardly anyone sent letters anymore. The handwriting on the envelope was neat but familiar. His heart skipped as he opened it. Inside was a short note. "Hey, I'm sorry for the silence. Things got tough for a while and I needed time to breathe. Mom's better now, thankfully. I've been drawing again more than ever. I even have an exhibit coming up next month in the city. It's small, but it's something. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I hope you'll come if you can. There's something I want you to see. A friend who still believes in miracles." He read it twice, then smiled, feeling something warm spread through him. When the day of the exhibit came, he walked into the small art gallery. The walls were lined with her paintings and sketches, beautiful, emotional pieces that told stories of sadness, healing, and hope. In the middle of the gallery, there was one painting that caught his attention immediately. It showed two people sitting at a bus stop under a broken umbrella. One of them was crying. The other was offering a hand. Underneath, a small note was written, "Sometimes a stranger's kindness saves your life." He stood there for a long moment, his throat tight, his eyes misty, when she appeared behind him. Smiling softly, he turned and couldn't help but smile back. She looked healthier, brighter, like someone who had truly found herself again. "I told you I'd draw it one day," she said quietly. He nodded, his voice low. "You kept your promise." "So did you," she said. "You never stopped believing." They stood there side by side, watching the painting in silence. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what they had both become because of it. In that moment, he realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, helping someone else doesn't just change their life, it gives you your own back, too. And as the evening went on, surrounded by laughter and art and life, he finally understood that miracles weren't about magic or luck. They were about people, about caring when it would have been easier not to, about stopping for someone in pain and finding a piece of yourself in the process. The night of the exhibit stayed in his memory for a long time. He couldn't stop thinking about the look on her face when she talked about her art. There was something alive in her eyes, a quiet fire that hadn't been there before. It made him realize that she had truly found her purpose again. They stayed in touch after that night. It wasn't every day, but often enough. Sometimes she would send him pictures of her new sketches, or short messages that simply said things like, "I found this old cafe you'd love," or "I remembered something you once said, and it helped today." He liked those small messages. They made him feel connected to something gentle and real, but life, as always, kept moving. His own days became busier at work. He had taken on a new project, something challenging but exciting. For the first time in a while, he felt like he was building something for himself too. Still, there were evenings when he'd walk by that same cafe they used to visit and glance inside. Sometimes he'd sit down, order a coffee, and look around, half expecting her to walk in with that sketchbook of hers. But he knew life wasn't meant to repeat itself. It was meant to move forward. One day she called unexpectedly. Her voice was cheerful but carried a touch of nervousness. "I have something to tell you," she said. He smiled. "Good news, I hope." "I think so," she replied, laughing softly. "I got invited to an art program abroad. It's a big opportunity, something I never even dreamed would happen." He felt a mix of joy and sadness at once. "That's amazing," he said honestly. "You deserve it." There was a short pause on the line. "It means I'll be away for at least a year," she said quietly. "Maybe longer," he nodded to himself. "That's okay. You've got to follow where your heart takes you." "I know," she said softly. "But I just wanted to tell you first because, well, you were there when I couldn't see any future at all. You helped me believe again." He chuckled gently. "You did all the hard work. I just reminded you that you could." Her voice grew warm. Still, I wanted you to know how much it means to me. I wouldn't be here without that day at the bus stop. He looked out his window, remembering that cold night, the rain, the silence, and a stranger sitting in pain. Maybe we were both meant to be there, he said quietly. She didn't reply for a moment. Then she said, I'll come see you before I go. A week later, they met at their favorite spot near the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. She was carrying a small bag with her sketchbook inside, like always. They sat together without saying much at first. It was one of those peaceful silences that didn't need words. After a while, she looked at him and said, Do you ever think about how random life is? How one small moment changes everything? He smiled softly. All the time. I've thought about that night a lot, she continued. How if you hadn't stopped, everything might have been different. I might have never found my way back. He looked at her and said, You know, I think we all get moments like that. We just don't always see them for what they are. Sometimes helping someone else gives your own life meaning. She nodded slowly. That's true, I think. Maybe that's what makes life beautiful. How people's stories cross and change each other without planning it. He looked out at the lake, the calm ripples spreading across the surface. It's strange, he said. We meet people for reasons we don't understand until later. She smiled faintly. Like you and me. He turned to her, his expression gentle. Exactly like that. They sat quietly again, listening to the sound of the water. Then she said, I made something for you. She opened her sketchbook and tore out a page carefully. It was a drawing, a simple but touching picture of a man holding out an umbrella over someone sitting in the rain. Below it, she had written, Sometimes being kind once is enough to change two lives. He looked at it, speechless for a moment. Then he said softly, This means more than you know. She smiled. Keep it. It'll remind you that what you did mattered. He nodded, folding the paper gently. I don't think I'll ever forget. The day she left, he went to the airport to see her off. The place was crowded, full of people hugging, laughing, crying. She stood there with her ticket in hand, looking both nervous and excited. I guess this is it, she said with a shaky smile. Yeah, he said quietly, but it's not goodbye. Just a new chapter. She looked at him for a long time as if memorizing his face. You know, she said softly, I used to think miracles were rare, but now I think they're everywhere. You just have to look closely, he smiled. Or be one for someone else. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you for being mine. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Go make the world see what I already saw in you. She laughed softly through her tears. You always know what to say. As she walked toward the gate, she turned one last time and waved. He waved back, watching until she disappeared into the crowd. Then he stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath, feeling both proud and a little empty. It was a strange mix of happiness and loss, like watching something beautiful drift away but knowing it had to. Months passed. He went back to his daily life, but something inside him had changed. He found himself becoming more open, more present. He started volunteering at a local shelter on weekends, helping people who were struggling. Some lost, some just needing someone to listen. Every time he spoke to someone who felt hopeless, he remembered her. He remembered how a single act of kindness had created a chain of healing neither of them expected. One evening, as he was locking up the shelter, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. When he opened it, he smiled instantly. It was a photo, her standing in front of a gallery overseas, her paintings behind her. The caption read, The exhibit opened today. I told your story again. He stared at the photo for a long moment, pride swelling in his chest. Then he typed back, Wait, keep shining. The world needs your light. Her reply came moments later. I learned that from you. Years later, he found himself walking through the same city streets where it all began. The bus stop was still there, though a new shelter had been built. He sat down on the bench, watching the rain fall softly. He thought about how much had changed, how far both of them had come. That night had started as something ordinary, but it had become the turning point of two lives. As he sat there, a young woman approached, her umbrella barely holding against the rain. She looked cold and lost, clutching her phone. He hesitated for a moment, then smiled and said, You look like you could use some cover. She looked up, surprised but grateful. Thank you. He held the umbrella over her and said, Rain's not so bad when you're not alone in it. And as they stood there under the same kind of rain that had once started it all, he realized something. Maybe that was how kindness worked. It never truly ended. It just kept passing forward, person to person, like light moving through the dark. He didn't know her story. He didn't need to. All he knew was that every act of compassion had a way of finding its way back to the world. That night, when he walked home soaked but smiling, he felt peaceful. Life had come full circle. The miracle he once gave had quietly become part of who he was. Sometimes, he thought, being someone's miracle doesn't mean changing their whole world. It just means being there when they need someone most. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Years later, his life looked very different from the one he once knew. The busy city had changed. New buildings had risen, old shops had disappeared, and yet some corners still felt the same. Every now and then, he'd walk past the old cafe near the park and smile. That place held memories he never wanted to forget. He wasn't the same man who once felt invisible in a crowded world. Something inside him had quietly shifted since that night in the rain. That night when he stopped to help a stranger who looked like she had given up on life. That night had turned into the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. He now spent his days helping others, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He volunteered at shelters, taught art classes for kids, and often visited hospitals to talk with patients who needed encouragement. The people there didn't know his full story. They just saw a kind man who listened without judgment and smiled as if he understood their pain. But he did understand. That's what made him different. On quiet evenings, when he walked home alone, he sometimes thought about her. The woman whose cry for help had changed everything. He didn't know where exactly she was now, but every once in a while he'd get a letter or a message. It would usually include a photo of her artwork or a note saying how her exhibitions were going. Her words always carried the same warmth, full of gratitude, hope, and new life. One message said, "I met a young artist who reminds me of who I used to be. I told her about you. I think she's starting to believe in herself again." He had smiled reading that. It felt like the kindness that started between them had grown and spread far beyond what either could see. And yet he sometimes wondered if their paths would ever cross again. Not because he needed closure, their story didn't feel unfinished, but because there was something comforting in the thought of seeing her again, even if only to say, "Look how far we've both come." One chilly autumn afternoon, he was sitting at the park where they had met years ago. The leaves were falling in slow spirals, painting the ground in red and gold. Children were running around, their laughter echoing through the air. He sat quietly, sipping his coffee, lost in thought. A woman nearby was sketching the lake, her movements calm and focused. There was something familiar about her posture, the way she tilted her head, the soft concentration on her face. At first, he dismissed the thought. It couldn't be her, he told himself. The world was big, but then when she turned slightly, the sunlight hit her face just right, and his breath caught in his throat. It was her. He froze for a moment, unsure what to do. Part of him wanted to call out immediately, but another part hesitated. She looked peaceful, absorbed in her art, just as she used to be. He finally stood up and walked closer. As he approached, she looked up, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then her eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I was wondering when life would let us meet again," she said softly. He laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. "It really is you." She put her sketchbook down and stood, still smiling. "I came back a few weeks ago. I was going to reach out, but I thought maybe I'd let life decide if we'd cross paths again." He smiled back. "Seems like life made the choice." They sat on the bench together like old friends picking up a conversation that never truly ended. "I saw your work online," he said. "It's everywhere now. You've really made something beautiful." She looked down shyly. "It still feels unreal sometimes. But I try to remember where it all began. That rainy night, the bus stop, the umbrella." He nodded, smiling softly. "That night feels like a lifetime ago." She looked at him closely. "You've changed too. You look lighter somehow, happier." He chuckled. "I guess helping people can do that. You made me realize how important that is. To give something back," she nodded thoughtfully. "It's strange, isn't it? How a small moment can ripple into so many lives." They sat there for a while, watching the lake. Neither felt the need to fill the silence. The quiet between them was full of meaning. After a while, she said, "I'm hosting a small event this weekend. It's not a big exhibition, just something local for students and new artists. Would you come?" He smiled. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it." That weekend, the event took place in a cozy art space downtown. The walls were filled with paintings, sketches, and sculptures from young artists. The atmosphere was warm and full of excitement. She stood at the front introducing the artists, encouraging them, her voice calm but passionate. Watching her, he felt proud, not in a possessive way, but in the way one feels when they see someone rise after falling. When she finished speaking, she came over to him and said quietly, "I want to show you something." She led him to a small corner of the room. On the wall hung a painting, simple but powerful. It showed two figures standing under one umbrella in the rain. One was offering shelter. The other was holding a sketchbook close to her chest. He stared at it for a long moment, his throat tightening. "It's called The Beginning," she said softly. "It's the moment everything changed." He turned to her, eyes glistening. "It's beautiful," she smiled gently. "I made it for both of us." He didn't know what to say. So he just nodded, taking it all in. The colors, the meaning, the journey that led to this moment. After the event, they walked outside together. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was abroad, I kept thinking about that night. I used to wonder why you stopped, why you cared." He thought for a moment, then replied, "I think I stopped because I saw something familiar in your eyes. I knew what it felt like to be lost." She smiled softly. "Then maybe that's what saved us both." They walked for a while without speaking, their footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. He finally said, "It's strange how life works. We were just two strangers who happened to meet in the rain, and somehow that moment changed everything." She nodded. "It did. And maybe that's what life is about. Those small moments that shift everything quietly." They reached the corner where their paths would separate. She stopped and looked at him. "I'm glad we met again," she said. "Me too," he replied. "It feels like everything came full circle." She smiled. Maybe it was meant to. Weeks passed, but that meeting stayed in his mind. He framed the small sketch she gave him years ago and hung it near his window. Every morning, when the sunlight touched it, he felt a quiet peace. He no longer wondered what his purpose was. He didn't need big answers or grand plans. Life had shown him that meaning often comes from the smallest gestures. A kind word, a helping hand, a shared silence. He continued his work with the shelter, continued talking to people, listening to their stories. Sometimes he'd tell them about a friend who once found her way back from the dark just to remind them that change was possible. One evening, he received another letter from her. It was handwritten this time. Inside was a small photo of a mural she had painted, a wall filled with bright colors and the words, "Kindness never ends." Her message said, "The mural is finished. It's dedicated to all the strangers who become each other's miracles." He smiled reading it. That sentence said everything. He put the letter down, looked out the window, and whispered to himself, "It really doesn't end, does it?" Outside, the rain had started again, gentle and steady, the kind that makes the world feel quiet. He walked to the door, stepped outside, and stood there for a while, letting the rain fall on his face. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a calm he couldn't explain. The kind that comes when you realize that even the smallest act of love can echo across a lifetime. Maybe that was the true miracle. Not one grand moment, but the way kindness keeps finding its way back over and over, through the people we touch and the hearts we heal. And in that simple, quiet truth, he smiled, because he knew he had been part of something far greater than himself.